welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about a very special orchid that I have just purchased. And this is an orchid that I never thought I'd be able to have in my collection, to be honest. So I'm over the moon that I've managed to actually get hold of one of these because it's something that doesn't really come up all that often in collections. And this is the Dimorphorchis Lowii. Now, this orchid can be a very large-sized orchid when it's fully grown, but it's a very slow-growing orchid. And I've been following the community project on YouTube for, I think, the past 2 years since it started, which is between 4 YouTubers, I believe, Miss Orchid Girl, Orchid Dude, BCN, Rogers Orchids, and Gardening at Duenza, where they all received a young plant of this orchid as part of a community project to track its progress over time in different environmental conditions. And I actually first read about this orchid when I was first starting out. I was browsing through different orchid species and looking through orchid species as you do on the internet, and I came across on the OrchidSpecies website a reference to Dimorphorchis Lowii, which immediately kind of caught my attention because it suggests a dimorphic orchid, so an orchid with 2 forms. So I looked into it a bit because I was really interested in that kind of idea and found that this orchid produces 2 distinct different types of flowers. So the basal flowers, or the lower flowers, are a reddish colour and they're very strongly fragrant apparently, whereas the upper flowers on its flower spike that it produces are yellow with red spots, really pretty, and apparently they're not fragrant. So they're very distinct types of flowers that it produces. I know that there is some suggestion maybe that some are the male flowers and some are the female flowers, but I don't know enough about that to really go into detail on that. All I know is they're really stunning and it's producing 2 flowers, which is such an unusual trait on any plant, let alone an orchid. I don't know any other plant that does that. It seems like such a unique trait. However, this orchid does not come up very often in collections, and for a large flowering size specimen, you're going to be paying a lot of money. I think because they're so slow growing in some cases. Now, so I've looked into the background a bit of this orchid on both OrchidSpecies and other kind of websites that talk about it and its environment that it lives in nature. So it grows in Borneo. It's a hot to warm growing orchid. So not even intermediate to warm, it's a hot to warm growing orchid. So this orchid's going to like really hot temperatures. So that kind of tells us already quite a bit of cultural information about it. So it's found at lower elevations, apparently, so from sea level to 1800 metres, but apparently it's often found overhanging bodies of water, which indicates kind of more distribution towards sea level. And it also kind of indicates that maybe it likes a little bit more moisture and humidity than a typical Vanda type, because if it's found associated or very close to large bodies of water, the relative humidity in those areas is going to be higher than more inland areas. So apparently it blooms in autumn and early winter on very, very long flower spikes. Now, I've got a long way to go before this orchid is anywhere near flowering size, and particularly because it is supposed to be such a slow growing orchid. So I've heard that this can take up to sort of 10 years from this size to get to flowering size. I mean, if that's the case, then that's the case, and I'm glad that I got it now rather than in 10 years' time when I decided that I wanted one. But it just came up at this size and I couldn't pass this orchid by because of how special it is and how difficult it is to find when you're looking for it. I just happened to be browsing through my favourite eBay sellers' website and looking through their plants, as you do, which I shouldn't be because I've already made a very big orchid order recently. And I saw this and even though I'd banned myself from ordering any more orchids anytime soon, I just had to. I couldn't pass it by. It wasn't particularly expensive, and I've got a really nice little plant for that money. For reference, there's kind of my hand size. So it's quite a nice sized little plant. Obviously it's very young, and we've also got a little keiki on it. Now, I was so excited to unbox this yesterday, and I had quite a long day at work, so I didn't film the unboxing or the repotting, but I did take some pictures, so I'll put them up on screen. It actually has a really great root system. So let's find some roots. They were just winding round and round the pot that it was in, and you can see here that we've got an actively growing root tip, which is always a good thing. And there's actually 2 or 3 actively growing root tips in this for this orchid. I mean, it's got some root tips which have emerged and then dried up. Maybe they'll come back to life. In some vandas, they kind of do, and they can just burst through the dried root tips. I'm not exactly sure. With this orchid, it's going to be a learning experience for me because it's not like there's a lot of cultural information around. And I think the most information I'm going to get is based on the community project on YouTube, where it seems like Orchid Dude BCNs is doing the best out of them, and so that seems to indicate maybe that it does grow better in the hot temperatures. So when I got it, I immediately repotted it because the bark that it was in was starting to break down. It's getting very crumbly, and when I unpotted it, the roots were just amazing, like they were just winding round and round the pot. So it obviously really enjoyed the potting media that it was in. It was in a fine bark sphagnum mix. So I've tried to keep the potting media that I've used very similar to this. So I've used slightly chunkier bark. It's probably about double the size actually of the bark that it was in. But to that I've added a little bit of leca, some perlite and some sphagnum moss to kind of keep the humidity and the moisture levels a little bit higher, to kind of compensate for all the air pockets that it has now compared to what it had before, where it didn't really have so many air pockets. So I'm hoping that the adaptation to this environment won't be too great because it's not too different to the media that it was already in, which it obviously enjoyed. There were no dead roots at all when I unpotted it, which is really unusual. So yeah, hopefully it will do okay in this kind of mix. Now this is my mix that I kind of go to for Orchids types, and I chose this because of the fact that it's often found in nature over bodies of water. So I thought that kind of indicated that it likes a bit more humidity. As you can see, I've left lots of air pockets in this, and I've done that intentionally. So the bark and the sphagnum moss is going to be holding on to more kind of moisture, and because of all the air pockets, it's just going to be more of a humid environment for the roots rather than them being wet or suffocated. And my Orchids do really well in this kind of setup. I know it's a completely different type of orchid, but just to show you that it can work for Bandaceous types. So you can see this has been staying a little bit more wet because it's got more moss in this one, but just loves it. The root growth has just exploded on this particular orchid. It loves this setup. So I think that this can work for vandas. It obviously depends completely on the type of vanda, so I'm just going to have to monitor with this and kind of see how we go. And I've got it in a clear pot so that if anything starts to go badly, I can just pull it out and try and rectify the situation. But I've tried to do as much research as possible before potting and deciding how I'm going to keep it so that I don't have that issue and then have that setback orchid, which this is such a valuable orchid, not just in monetary value, but in kind of value as an amazing, unique type of orchid that's really difficult to get hold of, that I really don't want to mess this up. So I'm trying to just do things correctly from the start. Obviously we all try and do that, so it doesn't always go to plan, but I'm hoping by the fact that their roots have lots of air around them, but as you can see, they're staying quite moist. This was soaked yesterday and it's still quite moist, even though it's sort of 25 degrees in my grow room at the moment in Celsius. And what I do with my hot growing orchids, like my cattleyas and any potted vandas that I have, is over winter I actually keep them on a heat mat. So this guy is going to go on the heat mat over winter as well. So hopefully that'll help to kind of mitigate the effects of the cold on it, because I try and keep my grow room above sort of 18 degrees Celsius in winter, but apparently this is not a cold tolerant orchid at all, which you can understand looking at where it grows in nature. So I'm really excited that I managed to kind of get this orchid, and I guess this is going to be the start of my own little project. This is separate from the other community project, but as a separate thing, just to kind of track its progress, I'll be posting updates regularly. Yeah, super, super excited and super happy that I managed to get this orchid. And we will, hopefully, I can just keep it happy. You see the little keiki that it has? It's so tiny. I've tried to keep it kind of a little bit less covered, so it's not actually, there's a big air pocket just below where the keiki is, so I don't rot it. And obviously you can see the size of the bark that I've used here. So yeah, this is the main growing season. Obviously we've got actively growing root tips. It's nice and warm at the moment, so I guess this is the best possible time for me to get it and repot it. and I will just keep you updated on the progress, and hopefully by the end of summer we'll at least have a little bit of root growth or something that I can show for this. This will hopefully be the first of many updates on it, and we can hope that it will do well in my environment. Thanks so much for watching today anyway, and if you enjoyed this video then subscribe to my channel for lots more updates on my growing orchid collection, and I will see you guys later. Bye!